Hi, I'm Leslie Appleyard, and I'm back with Dr. Michael DeMaria as we continue our journey on finding peace within. Today, we're discussing the last few chapters of the book. So, welcome back.
Thank you, Leslie.
Good
it's great to be here with you, as
you
always.
Too. So, should we just dive right into the soul?
Yeah. Well, that's, we kind of left off with peace within the heart. And the second half and the last third of the book really begins to shift the emphasis a bit. So yes, peace within the soul is probably my favorite module in lots of ways. In fact, I just finished teaching it on an on-site training right now.
Right.
So it's really fresh for
Good.
me. And it really is a bit of a change, because we talked about peace within the body, peace within the mind, peace within the heart, and even peace within the self has a lot to do with stepping back from our thoughts, our feelings, and bodily sensations.
Right.
To realize that who we are is actually beyond these particular objects of consciousness. I think we talked about the movie projector idea of the mind where, in a movie projector you have the light bulb and then you have this film strip. And that's very much how our mind is working all day. Thousands of thoughts, feelings, and sensations going through our awareness. So everything up to until now in the book has been about realizing we're not our thoughts, feelings, or sensations. We're like the light bulb in the film projector. We are that pure light of consciousness, that's steady and clear and lucid. But we have to train ourselves to step back from these objects of consciousness and really be just aware, this pure awareness that we are.
Right.
And we get to peace within the soul, it's a little bit of a shift because the soul actually is part of this sense of awareness, this kind of true nature that we are at the deepest core of our hearts. So peace within the soul, we really start finding what brings us alive and gives us energy and makes us just feel a sense of joy.
Yeah. So are there tips in the book to how to tap into that and find that?
Yes, absolutely. Part of that, the two main parts of this peace within the soul. First is disidentifying about all those things that are not you, which has a lot to do with all of these ego identities, these things we've been taught we are.
Right. So yeah, the difference between the self and the ego.
Yes, exactly. That's a really good point. I see this and I like to tell people, the difference between like the 3 and 4-year-old and the 13, 14-year-old. Mm-hmm. So that 3 and 4-year-old, we're very much purely in our soul. The soul is a child of nature. It's our essential self. The ego is a social self. It's basically a child of society. We grow in ego or a self. We don't come into the world with it, but we come into the world with a soul. This
right.
clear, really lucid part of us that's very spontaneous, very in touch with the moment, and kind of innately joyful. But what happens is to kind of get acceptance in a family and in school and a culture, all things that are important. But as we grow in ego or a self, we tend to get disconnected from this essence of our soul. So the first thing is stepping back from this socially conditioned self and begin to connect with essential, innate part of us. And that's why one of the ways of doing that is connecting to that inner child inside.
Right. And acknowledging, ignoring, how do you deal with the ego? Where does that...
Well, it's a very good point, because some people think, well, you should just get rid of the ego. We couldn't get rid of the ego if we tried.
Right.
The way I like to think of it is that you want to slowly have the ego moved outside of the center of gravity of the self. If you think of the self as kind of like a circle, you want the soul to be in the middle. You want the soul to be like the captain. Mm-hmm. And the ego can be a good first mate. And what I mean by that is it's kind of like the social self tells us kind of how to do some basic things and what's required to maneuver in the social world. So let's say this happened to me 10, 12 years ago. I talk about it in the book. I realized I was neglecting my music, and I really had all this music inside of me. I really wanted to share with the world, and I wanted to express this music inside of me. But my soul was saying, become a musician. And my ego was like, you've got all these patients and clients, and you've got a family. You can't just quit your job and leave your family, let go gone, and go to Tahiti and make music. So what do you say we kind of slowly start coming back and cutting back on your practice, carving out 2 or 3 days a week to do your music? How much money do you need to be able to cover your expenses? And then start investing in your life as a musician and an artist. Mm-hmm. So what was important was the soul began to chart the course, but the ego was kind of like the first mate executing the steps.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, of course. And I'm sure a lot of people have that same struggle on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely. And what happens, and this is a key piece of this whole process, is people tend to be either or, all or nothing. A lot of this peace within process is honoring the different sides of ourselves,
right,
and realizing that you can have it all. It's not going to look the way you think it's going to look, and has a lot to do with honoring all the relationships in your life, and in particular with yourself.
Right, which is exactly what I wanted to talk about. So the one chapter in the book is all about peace within relationships.
Yes.
And I feel like everyone can relate to that, obviously.
Yes.
So give me the overview of that chapter.
Yeah, wonderful. So I do think this is probably the most popular chapter and module, and people often, when they get the book, they'll jump right to peace within relationship. Because unfortunately in our culture and in our lives, relationships are very tough and difficult. I like to say relationships are kind of like the greatest mystery. I mean, that it's such a difficult thing, particularly in our culture, where the one thing we tend to allow ourselves to kind of get lost in is romantic love and relationships. And traditionally that wasn't the case. A lot of times you would have a lot of different ways, spiritually and otherwise, to kind of really feel connected to something greater or larger than you. But in our culture, we kind of really idealize this idea of relationship, romantic love, and we end up having a lot of unrealistic expectations about it, about ourselves, the other person, and we can kind of end up on the rocks. I have a whole section in there called The Search for the Magical Other, which is, trying to find somebody who'll kind of solve all of our problems, make us happy, be our missing piece. And of course, nobody can fully do that for us. So everything up until peace within relationship is about finding yourself, connecting to your heart and your soul, and realizing you are a center of meaning and your own center of gravity. So a big piece of peace within relationship is realizing what happens when two centers meet. So the key is, the main diagram in peace within relationships is like two pillars, and the we becomes a bridge between those two pillars or those two worlds.
Right. Or
two trees that don't grow in each other's shadow. So the idea is how to connect, and I often use this image, I'm going to show it on the camera here, whole together, whole apart. Whole together, whole apart. As opposed to most often in our culture, people create the situation where they're kind of codependently enmeshed, or you maybe have played this game as a kid where I don't know where I end and you begin. And this causes a lot of problems.
Right. Why? And what kind of problems? Like, what, speak to that.
So, making the other person responsible for your happiness.
Right.
The two things I see torpedo relationships the most in our culture, which we have over a 50% divorce rate for the most part, of first marriages, second marriages, 60%, third marriages, a 70% chance of divorce. It's really, we're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So the two things, number one, having unrealistic expectations of the other person in the relationship. Number two, making the other person responsible for your health and happiness. So often we kind of try to piggyback on the other person. A lot of times we're not happy within ourselves. And we think that if I give all of this to this person, then they'll kind of save me or rescue me from my own sense of self-loathing, self-hate, or maybe just a sense of not feeling enough. And this never works, of course, because it's not fair. Nobody can, and usually the other person's doing the same thing.
Right.
So it's kind of like, I use the analogy of two glasses.
Yeah.
And when we're born, every time we start to have some affection or love or have something good happen, it like puts water in the glass. When something bad happens, we're criticized, we have a negative experience or failure or abandonment, we lose water. None of us get to adulthood with a full glass of water. That's just, nobody does. But what happens is we start looking for other people to fill our glass. And that person fills us, but then they feel empty. And they're going, well, fill me. I need to fill my glass. And
Everybody's thirsty.
That's everybody's thirsty. So, I have these couples who, come and they say, fill my glass. I need some water. No, I don't have any water. You give me some water. So this is this chronic tension place we're in. So peace within relationship has everything to do with how do you fill your glass in a way that's not dependent on another person, particularly your romantic partner or your significant other or your kids or your employer or your employee. And this is where the self-care or care of the soul comes in, to where we fill that glass on our own.
Because is that, you also speak about codependent versus interdependent relationships.
Correct. So, of course, we're going to be in a relationship interdependent, meaning we care about each other, we want to show up for each other, we follow through on what we say we're going to do for each other. The difference between interdependence and codependence is healthy interdependence. We show up and help each other, support each other, but if the other person's having a bad day, or our sense of self is not dependent on the other person doesn't hold our soul or our heart in their hands, our sense of self. Literally, it's like them having the soul in our hands, where that's what happens in codependence. So it's like, let's say, a relationship, and I've had a great day, I come home and you're in a bad, awful mood. And I know, which never happens, Leslie, I know, but so I come home and all of a sudden it's like, I had a great day, things are, let me tell you what happened, and you're like, "Arr," just like not in a good place. Right. And I wanted to go for a run, and all of a sudden I'm totally focused on you, making sure you're okay. Not necessarily because of love, but it's like, oh my gosh, maybe there's something wrong. Maybe you'll tell me you hate me. Maybe you'll tell me that I'm not okay. I use the example of this idea of a wallet, wallet symbolizing your sense of self. My sense of self is in your hands. So all of a sudden I can't be happy unless you're okay. Now, if I am in full possession of my wallet or my sense of self, I come home and you're in a bad mood and say, gee, I'm sorry you're not feeling well. Do you want to talk about it? No, I don't want to talk about it. That's cool. I'm going to go for a run. When I come back, if you want to talk about it, great. But if not, that's okay. It's an invitation, not an expectation. I can be okay even if you're not okay. That's
because you're maintaining
my own sense of self. And I know that I'm okay with or without you being in an okay place.
Right.
You could see in a relationship, if you can't be okay unless the other person's okay, you're both kind of walking on eggshells. You're both, not being able to be totally upfront and honest with each other. And you can feel chronically anxious, about
and
the
then
other person.
Resentful, and it's a vicious cycle.
Right. That's where the control, manipulation, and I can't, where have you been? Wait, I don't really feel comfortable you having friends outside of our relationship, because that person's sense of self is too dependent on the relationship.
Yeah. It's such good stuff, and there's a lot more to talk about. So I'm going to get cozy, and we'll be back. Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Dr. Michael Brandt DiMaria, integrative psychologist and yoga meditation teacher. And today's topic is mindful creativity. So creativity really has a wonderful way of pulling us into the moment naturally, because it's full of possibility. We're always really working with what's happening, whether we're trying to paint something or doodle something or create some music or singing in the shower or dancing. These are all wonderful ways to practice mindfulness. The problem in our culture, though, is we tend to think of creativity having to be something like a professional thing you do, and if you're not a professional, you shouldn't be doing it. Well, this is ridiculous. In fact, I like to tell people to start with mindful doodling when you're working on your mindful creativity. Doodling can be a wonderful thing if you really just enjoy, particularly colored pencils. In fact, this whole area of adult coloring books is a wonderful way to practice mindful creativity. So taking some colored pencils and just exploring those doodles in a way that gives you a sense of presence. See what you see, hear what you hear. Whether it's you're singing in the shower this week, or doodling while you're listening to something, or dancing. Give yourself a moment to really be mindful of the creative process. See how you feel in your body, and really give your all and feel fully present in your creative process. This has been your Mindful Moment with Michael. God bless you, be well, and we'll see you next time.
Welcome back. I'm here with Dr. Michael DiMaria, and we're talking about peace within relationships. And there is so much to talk about.
Yeah, this is just the most popular topic if I go to teach at the university or do my classes or workshops, this is what people really want to know about.
Yeah. Well, one quote that really stuck with me was, it's not about finding the right person, it's about becoming the right person.
Isn't that great?
So good.
You know, I mean, I just to say it again, it's not about finding the right person. It's about becoming the right person. This is really an essential epidemic problem in our culture, thinking that we're the search for the magical other, that somehow we're going to find someone who's going to make everything okay. The one. The one is really a spiritual place that we need to find. For some people, religiously, that means God. That may mean some sense of spiritual connection to nature, something greater. For me, it's about also connecting and finding who you are and honoring and tending and caring for your own heart and your own soul. Something we don't do in this culture, which is really interesting. We have a tremendous amount of self-aversion, which means not feeling okay about ourselves. So there's this drive to somehow find someone who will then love us because we don't love ourselves.
And you talk about the need for love overpowering the love.
Yes, exactly. In fact, in the diagram with the two pillars, with the we being a bridge between them, that's where love is greater than the need for the person.
Right.
The codependent situation, the pillars are, the arch is underneath, where my sense of self is arising out of the relationship, that who I am is so defined by the relationship that the need is actually greater than the love. And this is where we get into manipulation, control, desperation, you know, and that's just not good. That's, I always say, and this is from the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, love in such a way that the other person feels free.
Right. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I like that.
So along those same lines, are there certain non-negotiables, or how do you stay in touch with yourself?
Right. So yes, this idea of two centers meeting, that instead of me orbiting around you or you orbiting around me, which is pretty much what people tend to do. That's why oftentimes somebody who's very empathic and somebody who's not very empathic often will find relationship. That if the other person is the center of gravity of your life, this is a real problem. That we each should be the center of gravity, our own sense of self. You know, which also means another way of saying that, you know, to become the main protagonist in the novel of your life. You know, if you don't know your story, you're just going to become a bit player in somebody else's story. And this is never healthy, creates resentment, jealousy. And also, this is another important thing. There's nothing more attractive than independence. So what initially feels, you know, so connected, this dependence, there's nothing more unattractive than dependence. There's actually some evolutionary reasons for this, that you know, we know now in some ways, one of the reasons probably that happens is that dependence of children on parents short circuits desire, you know, a romantic desire, because that could cause incest or other problems. The same thing happens, we call it parental bonding, if one part of the couple ends up being too parental, you know, too controlling, or the other person's too dependent. It actually short circuits desire. Tell people desire, just like making love, requires a little bit of friction. Yep. Sometimes bumping up against each other and finding out where you and the other person is helps create more healthy differentiation. In fact, studies show that the healthiest relationships have a high degree of differentiation. That means there's two people, there's two worlds interacting, not just one enmeshed world.
And if you're in that relationship where it is that way, what can you do to, again, take your wallet back?
Right. So this non-negotiable thing, I mean, to really, when you're doing the soul searching, finding out what gives you energy, what fills your glass. And this is going to be different for each person because we're all so amazingly individual and unique, which is beautiful. But it also means that we really have to take the time to know what brings us alive, what fills that glass. And if you're in a relationship and the person's saying, no, I'm not okay if you go play, you know, golf or tennis or go to your jazzercise class or your Zumba class or your yoga class, and you say, wait a minute, you know, this is what helps me be me and brings me alive and gives me energy, so I have something to bring to the relationship. So I love you, and this is non-negotiable. I'm doing this, and you actually don't have the right to tell me what to do and not to do. If it's not infringing on somehow hurting you, you know, that would be the one thing. So this idea of non-negotiables is part of holding your center. We each need to be able to hold our own center in relationship. And that's the only way for the other person really to see us, you know, is to really show up.
And you're
say,
a
"This is
better
me."
partner that way.
Oh, absolutely.
I am going to reference a terrible rom-com where Julia Roberts doesn't know what kind of eggs she likes, and she tries every kind of egg, and then it's like, but what do you really like? And it's the same thing on a very basic level.
That is one of my. Can we say the name of the movie?
Yeah, I
The
just
Runaway
can't
Bride.
remember it.
Runaway
Oh yeah,
Bride.
Runaway
I
Bride,
recommend
right.
that movie to a lot of people because
It's
that's
true.
exactly it.
Scrambled for me.
There you go. Actually, mine is Once Over Easy.
Okay.
So the idea there is definitely she was being very codependent. She whatever Richard Gere was going and interviewing all of her past relationships, and what kind of eggs does she like? Scrambled, just like me. Sunny side up, just like me.
Yeah.
So the idea is the symbolism of her taking time off, not being in a relationship, and discovering what she really liked. This is something we all need to do, whether we're in relationship or out of relationship. Is getting to know yourself is knowing what gives you energy, what brings you alive, what makes you feel you.
Right. It's wonderful. And now we're going to switch gears a bit just so we can cover most of the book. Finding peace within death. I know when you were writing this book, you lost your mother. Can you speak to us about that?
Yes, Leslie, thank you for asking. It was an ironic and somewhat painful situation that while I was penning this particular chapter, my mother was diagnosed with 3 terminal, though treatable, illnesses. And it was very painful and quite a challenge, and made me have to kind of really come to terms with how do you find peace within death? The death of a loved one or our own mortality, which is a difficult part of that process. So a theme throughout the book is that we can't choose what we feel, only to feel what we feel. So this idea of being genuine, authentic, peace within life, peace within death, peace within relationship, doesn't mean you're always going to be tranquil and serene and mellowed out. Peace is a matter of traveling. The idea that what's presenting ourselves, like if this is life and it's unfolding like rapids on a river, and these are my expectations, this is what causes suffering. The difference between what is and the way I want them to be, the expectation.
Right.
So the idea is some pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Meaning if I can take away, I'm not going to change reality, even if it's my mother is dying. But I can let go of the expectation that it's other than it is. So by taking off this layer of expectation, I could be there and roll and flow with the rapids that were unfolding. And part of that was to try to be as compassionate and present to what was happening. So often while I was in her hospice room with her, I would do my breathing and meditation, and I would really try to be present to what was happening, and notice the way the light was shifting in the room, and hear the sounds of the birds outside, and also try to just be really present without judgment. And we talked about mindfulness being present moment, non-judgmental awareness of simply what is.
Say that one more time.
Present moment,
Yeah.
non-judgmental awareness of simply what is. So when I could sit there and say, I am in this room with Mom and she's dying, and that means I'm going to really be present, which meant both sometimes just tears running down my eyes, but also just this tremendous love and just tremendous connection and for lack of a better word, sacredness, kind of the sense of a sacredness of connection. And so it wasn't that I didn't feel grief, but I wasn't wrestling with my grief and I wasn't resisting my grief. And that made me be able to find peace in the grief. So for me, even to be able to just to be with whatever is in this present moment. Like even if you're not feeling peaceful, as soon as you say, gosh, I don't feel peaceful right now, peace starts to be able to come into the picture.
Because then do you not move through that quicker?
Oh, absolutely. There's an old saying, what we resist persists.
Right.
So it's so true. It's kind of like a little kid pulling at your pant leg. The more you ignore him, the worse he gets. But if you go down and go, okay, dude, what's going on? What do you need? Then all of a sudden it dissipates. So emotions are simply energy moving through our body. And being able to be present to what we're feeling and to feel it all the way through, we release it, like we talked about last time.
Right. So is there, it's highlights of how to really deal with that and find peace within death.
Absolutely. And the other side of this is our own mortality. We talked about this and a number of books that are come out recently to talk about this. And one thing that I've done 3 or 4 times in the different soul work practices that I've done, including what's called a vision quest, which is based upon a Native American ceremony or soul initiation, is what's called the Death Lodge. And I have this exercise in the book at the end. And this exercise is visualizing throughout a whole evening being on your deathbed and imagining that you would die when the sun came up the next morning, and having imaginary conversations with all those people that you may have unfinished business with, either who are still living, who may have already passed on. It's incredibly instructive. And the last part of the exercise is literally having a conversation with God, or however you understand a higher power, or even just with death itself. And say, if I died tonight, what would I have regretted not doing or not being in my life? And to give yourself that experience is tremendously powerful.
Right, and changes how you live every day.
Absolutely.
Right.
In fact, I kind of talk about keeping death over your shoulder, which many traditions, Buddhist and Christian, talk about. Because then it allows you to live each day to its fullest. And it really puts in perspective what really matters. So the idea is, if you're not going to be worried about it in that last few hours of your life, is it something to really worry a whole lot about it during your life?
Yeah.
And it also reminds you what really matters.
Right. Thank you so much for this reminder and guiding us through this whole journey. Be sure to look out for the book coming out in June.
Maybe July or August.
July or August?
Actually, August 1st is the new date, which, because it's my parents' anniversary, it's dedicated to Mom and Dad.
Perfect.
And so I'm kind of excited that it looks like we're going to be releasing it on their anniversary.
Great. And there will be online components and
on-site
Facebook.
components as well, if they're interested. And
Great.
Yes, it'll be out there in social media.
All right, lots more to come. Well, thank you so much. And that's all.